We need an efficiency revolution. This is stressed by our next speaker. William is the founder and CEO of Infogrid, which is the global leader in building intelligence committed to making the built environment more efficient, sustainable, and healthier through smart technologies. Prior to founding Infogrid, William attended Oxford University, and he has, to say the least, a very varied career. He's worked in everything from finance to, wait for it, cage fighting in Thailand, all the way to being a tank commander in the British Army. And I now envision William sitting in a spaceship just light years away. He is joining us via satellite. And here is William Cowell the Gruchy.
Hi team. Sorry, no spaceship, but yes, via satellite. I'm such ashamed not to be with you in person today. So Infogrid had a very exciting announcement yesterday in that we have just acquired another business called Core, and that's going to be highly relevant to the conversation we're having today. But for any of you who've been through that kind of process, you know that it is very frenetic in the days running up to and immediately after you conclude. So unfortunately got sort of moved away from an intense travel schedule, but super excited to be talking to you still today. So there are some slides going up. I can't actually see what you're seeing, but I'm going to assume that we're on the why we need an energy efficiency revolution slide at the moment, and then I'll sort of give prompts to move through them. And I think the first question you're probably going to ask is, hang on a minute, aren't we at Air Summit? Why are we talking about energy efficiency revolution? Well, all will become clearer later on, but let's suffice it to say that there is a very intimate link between air quality and energy efficiency and general efficiency across commercial real estate, especially globally, and that's really important when, and I'm stealing my own lunch here, but when you know that global real estate accounts for 39% of energy consumption, and HVAC is 40% of it. So that is to sort of set the scene as to why it's relevant. So what I propose to do is, I think I've got you for 30 minutes. I'm going to do sort of 15 or 20 minutes going through some background information and facts and figures that we found through our own primary research that kind of supports why we're thinking the way that we're thinking. Then talk a little bit about how we're thinking, how our phenomenal partner Airthings and air quality generally sort of slot into that. And then most critically, how all of you in your organizations, whether your organization's looking at kind of investing in these kind of solutions, or you're an organization that is pushing these solutions out into the market, and, you know, Infogrid's view is the rising tide here lifts all boats, you know, why we should be thinking about this and how we can act going forward. So with that, if we could go to the next slide, which should say something. It's very weird not being able to see the slides, but I'm assuming now we're on one that's sort of white background, the energy crisis, increased awareness. So I think for the majority of this audience and probably the majority of the globe, it will come as no surprise that this year has been a very crazy year from an energy perspective. And, you know, we've seen wholesale prices from, you know, especially natural gas, but even kilowatts of standard energy consumption quadruple in a very short period of time, which naturally sharpens the mind of the world, but certainly the kind of bill paying component of the world onto energy, what's drawing down most of their consumption and how they might amend that. And then the backdrop to that over the last couple of years, I'm not sure if any of you noticed, it was kind of understated, but we went through this global pandemic thing, which shifted quite a lot of attitudes that have been commonly held for decades and decades around working, workplaces, and of course, presaged a very significant rise in hybrid working. So those are important kind of bits of background to some of the statistics that I'll kind of go into now. So So Infogrid went out and said, okay, look, we kind of hear the voices in the wind here, but let's try and put some hard numbers behind it. Let's speak to, in the end, thousands of different operators and occupiers and so forth of different buildings. And let's understand, what this means for them from a commercial perspective and what this means for individuals that make up their employee base and so on. So if we go to the next slide, please. Really, really very interesting is just how high a proportion in the US and the UK, which is where we focus our research, but you can certainly infer spreading this across Europe if nothing else, just how many of our respondents, and bear in mind in these kind of surveys, you never get much common alignment between survey respondents on any topic. So to see such a high proportion concerned around their cost of energy for them from working from home is astounding, right? So what does that really mean? Well, it means that you've got a whole bunch of people that are suddenly working from home, several days a week, if not fully from home, that they've not done ever before the pandemic, and now sort of paying 4 times or more for the energy they use whilst they sit at home heating and using various appliances and of course their laptops and so forth. And that really is a very big concern. So, what does that mean for their behaviour, and how does that tie into all of us when we're talking about air quality in commercial real estate rather than the home? So if we go on to the next slide, please. Well, what's really astounding about this is for an ever increasing number of people, already well over a quarter in the UK and over a third in the US, this is meaning employees are likely to go to the office more because they're so worried about the cost of working from home, right? Which is kind of astounding when you think back, even 5 years, to people's concerned about rail or road travel being a big expense for going to the office. They're now thinking, well, actually, if I go to the office, work from there, don't have to heat my home, maybe can even shower at work and certainly power my appliances at work, this is going to have a meaningful impact on my own budget. This is driving more and more people towards the office, right? And they're doing so very explicitly because of this energy crisis. So what does that mean for what we're doing as a business? So if we go on to the next slide, please. Well, those workers, whilst moving from the home to the office because of the energy crisis, are still highly concerned about broader planetary urgent sort of action being required on net zero, and also just the cost of energy for their employer, the sort of energy dependability that they can expect for their countries. And we've seen across the world various different countries which would never have ever been in sort of the thought zone for potential blackouts, discussing scenarios where they may have blackouts, including here in the UK. Right, so people are very acutely aware of this, and they're thinking a lot about when they go to their offices and expecting action from their employers. So if we go on to the next slide, please. They also think that the action really isn't there. Nearly half in both markets thinking their company is not currently doing anything at all or anywhere near enough to reduce the environmental impact that it is having across a range of factors, but especially in terms of energy efficiency and net zero. And then, so if we go on to the next slide, then we ask, okay, well, if you think that's the case, whose job it is, who's responsible for making those improvements? Is it you, the worker, or is it your employer that should be looking at how they improve their energy profile? Now that you're worried about energy, so you're going into the office more, you're worried about the planet, so you want the office to be more energy efficient, you don't think your employer is doing enough. Who should be driving it? Should it be you or your employer and your managers? Well, the largest share of respondents believed that it was either the managers or the owners, right? And then governments behind. Very slim proportion could relatively believing it's the occupants that need to do it. Surprise, surprise, right? Push the work off them and onto the owners and occupiers, right? So what does this mean? All of these people suddenly very worried about energy consumption, going into the office to minimize their own consumption, then worried about the energy consumption of their office and their employers, think something needs to be done about it. Don't think that they should do it personally. Think that the owner or manager of the building should be doing it, right? And those are our collective clients. So Yeah, I think if we skip past the next slide and go on to the slide that says it's never been more important to monitor occupancy and energy in real time, because I covered the previous slide before. So what does this mean for our collective business models, go to market, and critically, where does air quality come into the mix? Well, as I said at the beginning, buildings account for 39% of global emissions. There are over 14 million commercial buildings in North America alone. And of those buildings, typically HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, of which air quality is a critical data feed, account for about 40%, the largest individual line item of energy consumption. So the energy crisis and monitoring and optimizing air quality are intimately linked. And critically, from a perspective of a company like Infogrid, where we are going in, and what we say in an elevator pitch sense is we help our clients capture data they don't currently have and then use it to solve real world problems around real estate. Right? So that is a broad spectrum of data points. You might consider us a bit like a Swiss Army. So air quality might be our knife, energy monitoring might be our corkscrew or our bottle opener. And the point is that each of those tools are more valuable because they coexist with the other tools. So let's say now that I am a property manager or a building owner that has read through the Infogrid statistics I just took you through and is thinking, okay, wow, my occupiers or my employees, they really care about energy efficiency and they think I need to do something about it because they're coming into the office to minimize their own home footprint. They're worried about the footprint of the office and they want me to act on that. How do I do that? So the first thing that a lot of clients we see in this space come to us and ask for is energy consumption data. How much are we actually using on a building by building basis, right? And so I started this by saying, I've been somewhat distracted by the acquisition of Aquacore recently, who do exactly that, right? Who are helping Infogrid leap years forward into the ability to collect highly granular 1 or 5 minute interval energy consumption data at a building floor or even individual asset level to feed into this mix. Well, that's very much only part of the story. Because imagine now that I'm a landlord and I come to Infogrid or any other energy monitoring company and say, look, I need to understand my energy consumption because I've got to do something about it. So can you tell me what my buildings are doing? And let's say that they give us 2 identical buildings, both constructed in the same way in the same geography. And we put in energy monitoring and it comes back that, building A is using 100 kilowatt hours per day and building B is using 110 kilowatt hours per day. On that basis alone, it looks like building B is the far less efficient building. And that's the one that we should focus doing something on. But actually, if we add just one more data point to the mix, occupancy, and we find out that 10 people are using building A and 20 people are using building B, well, then suddenly building B is the far more efficient building because on a kilowatt per usage basis, it's lower. And then we start to go into okay, so now we know building B is the more efficient building on a usage basis. How do we render that building and the less efficient building in building A more energy efficient? And that is where clearly our focus sort of drops into air quality. Because once you've got energy consumption and you've got occupancy, then you overlay air quality, you start to see a correlation between how people are using a building and how ventilation and heating and cooling is working. And so commonly across the board when we are talking to our clients and looking at initial data, we are seeing crazy things, from very simple stuff like just leaving air conditioning on over the weekend when no one's there, to really heavily ventilating spaces or entire buildings when no one or very few people are in them. And for those less familiar in the room, like when we're talking about heavily ventilating, right, this is air refresh rate. So you might refresh your air in a building 10% an hour, you might refresh it all the way up to 100% an hour, which is what a lot of people did within COVID. And that doesn't seem like a big deal. It seems kind of innocuous, right? But think about what that actually is doing. That means you're taking 100% outside air and bringing it in and replacing 100% of inside air every hour. And you can absolutely bet that in all but the rarest scenarios, that outside air is not the same temperature as the inside air, nor is it the same humidity. So that means in every single instance, you are either needing to heat or cool that air to the same temperature as you're trying to maintain internally and remove the humidity from it. And that's vastly energy consumptive, right? So the less that you can do that, the better. But as we all also know, hear a lot throughout the Air Summit, I have no doubt, air quality is critical to the productivity, health, and general happiness of employees in that building. So what you can't go is, we're just going to rapidly cut down our ventilation, because you're going to have unproductive, sick, and unhappy employees who don't want to work for you anymore, and certainly don't want to come into the office anymore, right? And so you replace one problem with another. So you need a revolution. You need a hybrid kind of model. And maybe if we go on to the next and last slide here, you need a hybrid model that understands that you can't be doing 100% air refresh, but you need to do something, and you need to get smarter about it. And that's where really high quality, granular air quality metrics and data from amazing sensor suites like Airthings, overlaid with additional information like things like occupancy, energy consumption, and with Infogrid we go further and look at water consumption, cleaning schedules, all sorts of things. When you start to bring these together and then throw AI into the mix, of course it wouldn't be a technology presentation without throwing buzzwords like AI in occasionally somewhere. When you start to then throw AI into the mix, you can start to make really proactive recommendations about how to meaningfully improve the energy profile of a building, whilst maintaining or even improving the health outcomes of that site for those employees, right? And this can be as simple as just identifying that you don't need to run that air conditioning over the weekend because no one's there. It could be that you shut down certain parts of the building or certain floors of the building and consolidate people into fewer buildings. Or it could be you move to a dynamic model whereby your BMS or equivalent, and that equivalent might simply be opening and closing windows, is optimized based on real-time data around things like CO2, which is a very good proxy metric for how much of other people's breath you are breathing in, which is generally accountable for a lot of the kind of health concerns people might have in space. So the point is, we need a real revolution in how we think about this from an operator and an owner perspective on buildings, and not to look at energy efficiency as one problem, air quality and health as another problem, but to see them all as a part of the same problem, and to kind of rejoice in that, because that means one solution to multiple problems. And the beauty of the fact that you're all here in this room is that solution exists today, and it is hugely empowered by the amazing advances that the world and Airthings, particularly, in Infogrid, we believe Airthings are there as the front runner in this, in terms of the ability to, in a very simple, very secure, but low cost and user friendly way, capture in real time this high degree of air quality monitoring, combine that with similar advances in energy monitoring, occupancy monitoring, and so forth, and really make those much better proactive decisions day to day about how to improve how we operate. So it is possible. The solutions are there today. I think where the solutions are live and ready, the public awareness, the awareness amongst occupiers and owners lags. We all in this room, whether we are on that owner and operator side or whether we're on the solution provider side, have the onus on us to kind of raise our own understanding and then bang the drum about what can be done, and together go and make that happen. And the last thing I want to point out here is, often when we're talking about technological solutions to problems that affect things like health or the environment, people assume that that's going to come at a cost in dollar or euro terms. But that's not the case here. Actually, unequivocally across the board, in real deployment, and Infogrid has done thousands and thousands and thousands of buildings globally with this now. In real deployments, we are seeing this create a very meaningful cost reduction, not increase. Even after the cost of the services is involved. And I'll give you one live example. We worked with a client recently where we identified within 2 days, off of the back of about $5,000 worth of technology deployment, annualized energy alone. So this is energy alone without starting to talk about any kind of employee productivity gains or anything like that are very essential to the air quality ROI. Energy alone, $50,000 of annualized savings, equating to about 14 tons of CO2, simply by avoiding completely unnecessary wastage identified by looking at the combination of air quality and energy monitoring. So these solutions don't break the bank, they actually support the bank. And this is one of the sort of great joys and almost ironies of this age, is like we have all these solutions at our fingertips that are not only unequivocally good from a health and carbon perspective, but also from a bottom line perspective. We just need to make sure that we are acting with ever more speed to implement them at scale. So Infogrid, we exist to make that happen internally. we measure our success, our North Stars, in the tons of carbon we prevent reaching the atmosphere and the healthy hours we create for our clients and the employees that are in their buildings. And I invite you all to join us, join Airthings, and the rest of the ecosystem that you'll see represented over the Air Summit and meet represented in the room in making this happen. Because that rising tide really does lift all boats. We all need to do this. Infogrid can't do it all alone. We need all of your help, both from the operator perspective and from the partner perspective. So with that, I will stop waffling on. I shall brace for questions around more things like cage fighting and tank commanding and air quality. But yeah, looking forward to hearing if you've got any questions. And thanks again so much for having me. Thank you.